everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us today for the Cybersecurity Beyond the Firewall panel. Very excited to be a part of Tampa Bay Tech Week. Today's conversation, first of all, I'm just going to say I'm a little bit nervous, so it may take me a couple minutes to work through that a little bit. So nice to see so many of you here today. Today's conversation sits inside of a much bigger moment inside of our region. For those of you who live in the Tampa Bay area, you may have heard the term Cyber Bay recently, and that is a coin for the movement that is happening here in Tampa Bay. We are actively positioning ourselves as the nation's leading hub for cybersecurity, with more than 25% of Florida's tech jobs based right here in Tampa, a city that is the only one in the United States with 2 combat and command military headquarters and is now home to the first named college in the country dedicated to AI and cybersecurity. So this panel today is featuring some of the people bringing this to life. The leaders who are building the infrastructure, defending the perimeter, training the workforce, and certifying the supply chain. The question in the room that we are going to be focused on today is not whether or not cybersecurity matters. I think that if you are here in this room with us, you know that it does. The reason that we're here today and the question that we're hoping to answer is whether or not Tampa Bay's organizations are actually prepared to face the threat landscape that we are facing. So before we dive in, I'm just going to briefly introduce the wonderful panelists that I have up here with me today. First up, next to me, I have Joyce Rancani. She is a founder and CISO of EncapCyber, as well as the Chief Technology Security Officer at Qualys. Joyce is a cybersecurity executive and CISO with experience across defense, healthcare, and retail cybersecurity, which are sectors with completely different threat models, regulatory environments, and consequence levels. Joyce is an expert in zero trust, product security, and maturing operational resilience. Thank you for being here. Yes, give her a round of applause. Next to Joyce, I have Ernie Ferassaso, who is the Senior Director of Cyber Florida at the University of South Florida. Ernie is a retired U.S. Marines intelligence officer with a vast experience in intelligence and cybersecurity. In his role at Cyber Florida, he helps strengthen cybersecurity efforts across the state and unites government, academia, and private cybersecurity sectors. And he was also appointed by Governor DeSantis in 2024 to the Florida Cybersecurity Advisory Council. Thank you, Ernie, for being here. Next up, we have Michael Brooks, who is the Director of CMMC Strategy and Engagement at A-LIGN. And Michael has a deep experience guiding organizations through certification readiness. He's completed dozens of successful CMMC Level 2 assessments across a wide range of defense contractors and has a very clear and sometimes sobering view into what organizations struggle with, the patterns that are emerging, and where people need a little bit of assistance. So he is kind of the person who tells defense contractors what they don't want to hear, but they need to. And then on the end, I have Larry Trotter, who is the founder and CEO of Inherent Security. Larry supports healthcare technology and growth stage companies navigating complex security and compliance challenges. When hospitals get attacked, and they do, Larry is the person that organizations call. And he has very strong views on what it means when critical infrastructure can't fund its own cybersecurity. Thank you for being here. And I'm Sarina Gandy. I am a senior communications and marketing analyst at Cyber Florida. I've been working in the cybersecurity communications world in Tampa Bay for the last 7 years, and it's my passion to learn about the humans behind the screen and beyond the firewall. So I'm very happy to be here with all of you today. So today we're going to explore what it really means to go beyond the firewall, and not just from a technology standpoint, but from the perspective of people, process, and the ecosystem. So I'm going to start today's discussion with a statistic from the inaugural Cyber Bay survey. The survey found that 80% of organizations say that current security solutions are too expensive, and 74% believe that existing education is failing to prepare the next generation. If those numbers are accurate, I think it raises a very important question. Where do we have the biggest opportunity to strengthen how we are building and protecting our systems here in this region? So just a quick show of hands really quick. How many of you here today have experienced some kind of security incident in your organizations in the last couple of years? It's a good amount of hands, yeah. And can you raise your hands again if you found out about those incidents in real time, like as they were happening? And how about after the fact? So about half and half. So Ernie, my very first question of today is directed to you. You have a very unique statewide view of Florida's cybersecurity threat landscape. Seeing these hands raised out here, what do these numbers kind of represent for you?
Well, first, thanks for the question, and thanks for having me here. So it's interesting when you talk about the findings of the survey, and then we just look around here. The thing I think that is really interesting about this is I have to believe that even though folks at within their organizations, they may not think that may not be aware of a cyber incident at their organization, but statistically speaking, their organization has been either directly or indirectly impacted, whether it's their entity themselves or one of their clients or supply chain organizations that has affected that. So, and I think that's part of the story to be told, is that this is now everybody's business, and it's important that everybody take a part in it. When we look at the finding things are too expensive, or that the workforce people aren't being prepared. Part of the challenge is that it's not so much that we don't have that tools are expensive, but it's that we are in this area where I think we're arguably not moving fast enough. Where I'll say cyber and cybersecurity is becoming more understood, that it involves every part of the organization. Earlier on, even 4 or 5 years ago, that was predominantly that's an IT department's problem. Mm-hmm. It's not our problem to worry about. And so you had senior, if you weren't in the quote tech field, then it didn't matter to you. Well, that's changed. That's changed completely. And so I think when we talk about the workforce and resource allocations and demand signals and all that, and particularly even cyber strategy within an organization, the key thing, and that we're getting towards now, is educating and making senior leaders across any organization, any sector, aware of how their entities are dependent on cyber and cyber-enabled systems. I mean, you mentioned healthcare, right? How getting healthcare executives to understand this? Well, cyber, it's not that important until their patient management system, which is this is not administering medication. This isn't performing surgery. This is the, for lack of a term, the back office suite that allows them to track patients goes down because of a cyber incident, and that hospital can no longer treat and admit patients. So now they stop being a hospital. And so this, quote, little IT problem now is an existential problem, not just for that hospital, but now all of a sudden, that hospital can't treat patients, can't admit patients, but that doesn't mean people aren't still coming to the hospital. And so now all of a sudden, all the other hospitals in the area have to be worried about an uptick in patients. Or the same type of thing is, well, we don't have to worry about cyber. As a hospital, I don't have to think about that. I don't have to think about my suppliers, except when your single contracted blood supplier has a cyber incident not related to the management of their blood, but to their payment system, which shuts down their blood supply ability for weeks. Now all of a sudden, oh yeah, by the way, you've negotiated a single source contract with that entity that even though they can't provide it, you still can't go anywhere else. Now you're a hospital that can't get blood because one of your suppliers has had a cyber incident. So long story short, that's about changing the mindset of the leadership and management to understand that most, if not all, organizations, their critical functions that make them able to do what they do have some sort of, that are cyber enabled or rely on cyber. And that changes the mindset that you got to think about not just your ambulances, your doctors, your trucks, your buildings, but what's your key, when it's 10 o'clock at night, you know where your data is, type of thing. It's understanding what processes and understanding where your things are in cyber.
Very well said. Lots has changed over the last couple of decades, and we really are all in it together. It's everybody's problem. And something else that has changed a lot in recent years is the model of security. The security models are changing drastically. The old model of security was focused on building a wall and kind of keeping the threats outside, and that has changed a lot. That kind of mentality has died a little bit. And the new model is zero trust, where you assume breach and you verify everything. And most organizations know this, but a lot of organizations still struggle to actually implement it in practice. And that gap in between knowing and doing is where a lot of attacks actually happen. So Joyce, you have built zero trust programs at scale inside some of the largest organizations in America. Can you tell me what is the most common place that organizations get stuck or fail when it comes to implementing zero trust into their process?
Thank you. And thank you for having me. So zero trust, right? So in security, before the model was trust but verify. With zero trust, it's verify and then trust, right? And so it's shifting the model from implicit trust to validate everything and then trust, right? And what I mean by that is validate your identity, your devices, your applications, your data, like validate everything before you give access to anything or anyone, right? And so that encompasses making sure that companies understand their asset models, understand their third-party vendors, understand their service providers, right? So it's forcing them to do that. Where I see, in all of my experience in building zero trust programs, where I see zero trust failing at scale is two things, right? The ownership gap and organizational cultural changes, right? And so I'm gonna pick on the first one first, the ownership gap, right? And so it's rare, and Mike and I were at CVS together, it's rare that organizations has full comprehensive visibility of all of their assets, right? And so what I mean all of their assets is your applications, your workstations, your servers, your VMs, your containers, everything in the cloud, your third-party vendors, your SaaS applications. Like, it's very, very difficult in order to manage those. And then at a granular level, your APIs, your service accounts, all of your interconnections. Like, when you think about that, all of those are endpoints. They must all be secured. They must all have strong authentication models, right? And so having that ownership gap, and that's why I said the first one is ownership gap, is having that complete comprehensive visibility in order for you to successfully enable zero trust. You must understand who's on your network, who's trying to access your network, who's that third-party vendor that requires access, their SaaS applications. And so that's one of the biggest reasons why it's difficult. I'm not gonna say it fails, but it is difficult because even the asset owners don't understand how many people are accessing their applications or accessing their devices, right? And then the second reason why I think it's a big, big struggle, as I said, is cultural organizational changes, right? In security, we must follow the brilliant basics, right? Security development life cycles for your applications, your infrastructure, and your cloud, right? And so that's the brilliant basic. But then you overlay zero trust on top of that, ensuring that you understand the authentication model and the access model for all of those endpoints. It's changing that culture, is making sure that everyone understands they have as Ernie nicely said, everyone has a role to play in cybersecurity, right? And so everyone must understand, if you're an asset owner, understand who's accessing that asset, who's accessing your application, what third-party vendor needs some of that data, right? And so that's why zero trust fails at scale, because they don't understand their asset inventory, and it's difficult to change the organizational culture for everyone to swim up the same lane. And, oh, one more thing. So then with Zero Trust is 20% technology and 80% organization and cultural changes. Oh, wow. So that's why it's really important for that importance or that organizational structure to be supported by executive leadership. So they can flow that down and everyone understands that they have a role to play, and then they're being measured and held accountable for it.
Wow, 80%, that is crazy. It really does go far beyond the firewall. It's once again, everybody is kind of involved in it. Thank you, Joyce. I just learned a lot. Larry, my next question is for you. So as Ernie and Joyce have mentioned, you work primarily with healthcare technology companies where the stakes are incredibly high. HIPAA has existed since 1996. Why are health tech companies still getting this wrong in 2026, and who is the one paying the price when they do?
So I love this question because I really want to frame it. It really starts from the top. It's a trickle-down effect, and it starts with HIPAA, HHS, Health and Human Services, and the Office of Civil Rights. They're the ones who essentially manage the law and also enforcement. So the big problem is enforcement. OCR comes in and does an audit if someone gets breached, but they don't have the resources to do that. And penalties go along with that. They're just not high enough. So it's uncomfortable, but the truth is, a health system would say, or entity would say, we'd rather take the risk versus trying to spend the money on cybersecurity and actually do the right thing. So that's a problem in itself. So, how does this flow to the actual health system? So the health system adopts a health tech product, and they must require that health, tech product to be HIPAA compliant. They take it a lot, when they go through the security procurement process, they take a lot of what the health tech company says at face value. The due diligence really isn't there. Although I will give them credit, it has gotten better over the last few years because, as Ernie mentioned, when it comes to the supply chain ecosystem, they have been responsible for breaches in the top 3 within the last 2 or 3 years and rising, especially in healthcare. And specifically in 2024, 42% of the breaches were due to the supply chain in healthcare. If that doesn't say anything in itself. So health systems have gotten better at that. So where does health tech come in? At the end of the day, they really want to close the deal. And to close the deal, sell the solution, they must be HIPAA compliant. So what do? They do it, but they treat it as a checkbox, not as a core value to the business. So, are we doing security awareness training? Check. Do we have access controls? Check. Encryption? Check. So when it's treated like that, it's not going to be as robust as it needs to be to stay safe. And at the end of the day, who are we all hurting? It's the patient.
Absolutely. Thank you, Larry. And Ernie, I'm coming back to you. From your statewide perspective, what does Beyond the Firewall actually look like for organizations at different stages and capabilities? There are so many different sizes of organizations in Florida, small, medium-sized businesses, huge businesses. What does this look like when you're looking at all of these people in the state of Florida?
So if I were to look out into the future, where it ought to be, and what we're endeavoring to do is there's a couple of things. I call it, we have to be able to live and operate in the 21st century, and that's kind of a big deal, and that's where everything is involved with. There is some sort of cyber capability baked into everything that we do. We're in a world where artificial intelligence, agentic AI, that's here to stay. I was talking with someone yesterday involved in quantum and post-quantum computing, and I'm just going to throw this out. So some of the estimates on when we're going to see the first real quantum changes in quantum computing and things in 2030 or 2029. All right, that sounds like a Buck Rogers Star Trek date. 2030. That's 4 years from now. That's my kids going to high school and graduating. And now we're talking, quantum computing is in our society. So it's here. So what does that mean? It means, you mentioned about HIPAA, and it's still viewed as a compliance risk, right? What are we going to do? It's cheaper for us to take the hit and pay the fine than it is to do the system, right? That doesn't. Now you can do that if it's just a data breach, if you're just going to do that. But if it's the data breach that takes your patient management system offline, that means you no longer can treat patients. That's a much different problem set, and it's getting people to think that way. That it's not. This is a existential. This is a serious business risk, not a compliance risk. And changing that mindset, and people thinking differently about how this works. You mentioned the challenge of not knowing where your stuff was or what stuff is there. I know it's not. Nobody likes to hear that. Well, I got a bunch of. Hey, this. It's just what it is. It's if you're a carpenter, you know what tools you have in your tool bag. Well, it's that same type of thing. If you're a marketing person, you should know what tools you have on your desktop, what tools you have in the that are in the cloud. If you're running the marketing shop, you should know that these are the different tool sets that I have and how they interoperate. And then because everybody talks about the cloud. Yeah, that's just somebody else's computer. And where is that? And how about this? With the latest and greatest stuff that's going on in the Middle East. Yeah. Did anybody get the notice from Amazon Web Services about you may want to limit your use or shift some of your data around because a couple of their data centers are no longer data centers but craters in the ground because they got blown up? Yeah. So, these are the types of things. Did you even know that your data was being stored in UAE? So again, it's changing that thinking around it, and I think that's what's on the good side. I think that's encouraging because we're seeing that more. You're seeing more thinking that way the more we get involved with it. And I think that's also where the talk of artificial intelligence and adopting different models and tools and systems. People are understanding the capabilities, the power that it can be, but also getting to the point where they realize, oh yeah, it's not just a set it and forget it. This is a living and breathing thing as much as it is, as we're in the room here now.
Thank you, Michael.
I wanted to add one thing.
Yes, please do.
Ernie, about changing the mindset. It definitely makes a lot of sense. And in terms of healthcare, I don't know if everybody knows, last year there was actually an incident where a patient died because of a cybersecurity attack. So it's happening now, and someone might say, oh, well, that's a one-off. But it really isn't, because it was due to ransomware, and that's, I would say, 98% of the breaches that you hear about across industry in general, but healthcare. So it is definitely, changing that mindset. And also geopolitical tensions. 2 weeks ago, a medical supplier, Stryker, was breached, and it was from an Iranian group, and they didn't want anything, but they said it was just, because we're at war. So a lot of those considerations, organizations need to take into consideration.
Wow. Michael, I'm about to dig very deep into your brain in our next section, but first I want to hear, do you have any thoughts on this and where you're currently seeing organizations get this right or where they're getting it wrong?
Yeah, I do. Thank you for having me. Thanks to everybody. Really appreciate it. My first thing I would like to do is really just ask a question of the audience, just something to think about. Why didn't the IT team set up the remote office at the beach? It was too cloudy.
It's very nice.
Okay.
Nothing worse than cyber humor.
Cyber humor, you got to bring it. I mean, like Ernie, I'm a retired Air Force cyber operations officer, right? That's what I did in the military. The military is very simplistic. It's push button, get cookie. It's got to be that simple. And so, that's the lens that I view things through, is really, when we talk about cybersecurity, it's security. We just put cyber in front of it and we lose our minds. We forget how to protect and defend things. You know how to protect your home. You probably have a Ring camera on the front door. Every time the door opens, you get a notice. You've got a lock on your garage door. You've got a PIN code. You probably have a lock on your gate on the backside. But when we get into computers and data and systems, all of a sudden we lose the ability to protect things and think about things holistically. And so I think for me that it comes down to strategy. Joyce was talking about zero trust. Zero trust isn't a mystical, magical thing. It's not a technical solution. It's a strategy. It's an implementation strategy of how you apply tools and technologies and process to secure things. This is why we have compliance regulations. Compliance regulations state what the baseline requirements are, and then you've got people who will say, well, compliance doesn't equal security. It's like, well, hold on a second. There's 110 security controls in this cyber baseline. How is that not providing some base level of security? So we don't understand that. I mean, maybe as IT people, as cyber professionals, InfoSec folks, we kind of understand it maybe from a control perspective, but our business partners don't. Our executive leaders don't. And that's where I think we've got the gap, right? And so, again, back to the simplicity. It's the principle of war, push button, get cookie. We've got to make this stuff simple. We've got to understand what we're protecting and how we're protecting it. And here's another thing. Not everything's worth protecting. There's some things in my garage, if I left on the front lawn and they were gone in the morning, I wouldn't care about them, right? So not every system, every account, every email, every data file is worth protecting. Some of it is just, I don't care. I don't care if you drive by and look at it, and you could take it if you want to. It doesn't bother me. I'm not going to spend resources protecting that stuff. And so as we advance further and further in technology, as things start to sprawl more and more, it's less about how do we protect it all and more about what do we really need to focus on and really need to protect.
Great answer. You can go ahead and keep that microphone because next we're going to be diving deep all into the defense ecosystem and CMMC. So the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification is no longer theoretical. Defense contractors who handle controlled, unclassified information must now certify, and those certifications are being evaluated by third-party assessors with very real teeth. Tampa Bay's defense sector, anchored by MacDill Air Force Base, has thousands of contractors in this pipeline. Michael, you have conducted dozens of CMMC Level 2 assessments. In your point of view, where are you seeing organizations struggle when it comes to preparedness and CMMC readiness?
Another question for the audience. A show of hands, has anybody heard of CMMC? Okay, it's about half. Is anybody directly affected by it now, trying to figure it out, trying to get certified? Okay. CMMC is a Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification from the Department of Defense. I can't say Department of War because I'm not there yet, so Department of Defense. I need more time. And so there have been requirements, cybersecurity requirements in place on defense vendors for about 10 years to meet the security control requirements in a NIST publication. It's called 800-171. It's protecting control unclassified information. This is information that the DoD believes is sensitive enough to require additional protection, but it's unclassified. They protect it in a federal system. When they send it to a contractor, it goes into a non-federal system. The requirements are around that non-federal system. There's 110 security control requirements. If you're going to be storing, processing, or transmitting this information on behalf of the Department of Defense, in other words, you're doing work with them, you've got contractual requirements, you're required to meet these requirements. That's essentially what, and now CMMC is just a third-party validation of that, right? The requirements are not new. They're almost 10 years old. Originally, it was self-attestation. Again, I'll use another military example because that's the way I think. It's just, you tell us you've done your PT test. You just log into the portal, report your 1.5 mile time, tell me how many push-ups you've done, tell me how many sit-ups you've done, and that's good enough, right? And we'll continue to keep you on active duty, right? What we were finding out is as the self-attestation model for the DoD, as they were rolling that out, it wasn't working. We were losing national security IP through the defense supply chain, right? Critical data. Has anybody seen the F-35 J-20? It took us 20 years to develop the F-35. Took China, I think, 5 or 6 years to develop the J-20. And they're on to a 6th-gen fighter now. And so there's a lot of sensitive data in the supply chain. So now the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, CMMC, has become a contractual requirement to either self-assess or third-party assess. So in other words, we're not just taking your word for it anymore. We're going to now send somebody to check to make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Does anybody do work with US SOCOM? US SOCOM, I retired out of SOCOM, okay. I'm MacDill Air Force Base. They just put their global soft services solicitation on the street. I think it's a $4 billion contract. You cannot bid on that contract if you do not have a cybersecurity maturity model certification level 2 self-assessment. So it is starting now to show up. And what we're seeing really is defense vendors are really now starting to understand. The big guys have been doing it for a while, right? The Boeings, the Lockheeds, the L3 Harris, they know how to do this. It's when you get into the tier 1, the tier 2, and further down the supply chain is where it becomes an issue. So if you're in the defense space, you definitely should know about NIST 800-171. Those are your basic requirements, and then the CMMC is basically the validation mechanism on top of it.
Yeah.
Just something that, to add a little bit more gas to that, the self-attestation aspect of it, if you don't think that's a serious thing, just go talk to, I think it's Penn State, Georgia Tech, that checked, yeah, we meet all these things. Well, they may or may not have actually happened, but then I want to say it was probably the Department of Justice. Yeah, they were fined several millions of dollars under the False Claims Act. So basically, this isn't, oh yeah, sorry, we'll get back to you. This is, no, you've committed, you are in strict violation of federal statute, and there are serious civil penalties against this. So nobody's messing around with this anymore. But also, think about it in the same way, if you were in the government shoes, right, you're letting people essentially inside of your organization to have access to some of your pretty important stuff to come and go. So you want to make sure it's a supply chain risk management type of system. And so I think while the CMMC compliance aspect maybe become onerous for some, but first off, if you take it from the start that this is something we're just going to have to do, it's like seatbelts in a car, you're just going to have to do it. The level 1 stuff, and even some of the level 2 is not. I mean, this is like if you're not doing that, you're almost into the was it willful neglect side of things. But it's just some of that stuff. It's just good practice for anybody to be doing. And the other thing I'll add is generally speaking, where the Department of Defense goes, so the other federal agencies soon follow, which then state agencies will go. And so it's one of these, it's either you can get on the train now and just embrace it, what is it, how I learned to love the bomb, and not, that type of thing. It's just, the sooner people you get on board and start just doing it, and again, the level, some of the things are just basic things you should be doing anyway.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, and let's zoom out a little bit. I mean, anymore, whatever industry you're in, you're going to run into some sort of cybersecurity regulation that you're going to be required to meet. If you're developing applications, your customers are going to want to see some third-party attestation that you've got the controls implemented to protect their data. If you're in healthcare, right, when you go to the hospital, you're going to want to make sure that your patient data is protected. There are regulatory requirements around that. If you're doing business with the DoD, there are regulatory requirements around that. So for the folks in the room that are in the cybersecurity arena, that are in the InfoSec arena, that's our job to implement those controls, again, for our business partners seamlessly and in a way that works, right? And if you're a customer, that's your expectation, right? When you show up and you go to Tampa General Hospital, you expect your data to be secure. That same expectation is going to go cross-industry. And we're going to see more and more of it, especially as technology continues to rapidly advance. And again, I think the paradigm shift for me is it's not all worth protecting, but the stuff that is worth protecting, let's protect it and protect it well.
How do you determine what is worth protecting and not? That's out of my own curiosity.
This is where the compliance stuff comes into play, right? This is where the regulatory requirements come into play. It's your customers are probably going to define it for you. That's what I would say.
Wow. Okay. Joyce, Larry, do you guys have anything to add on this, or?
I would just add, to answer your question as far as how do you determine what to protect and what security controls to put around it is really base it off the data. that you're protecting, what systems are storing or processing whatever the data is, and however sensitive that data is, you might want to classify it as a high, medium, or low, and then you apply the controls based off that. NIST has a lot of special publications that can help you determine what controls to use, but yeah.
Yeah, and to add to that, it's going back to assets, right? It's understanding the business criticality of those assets, right? You have assets that have crown jewels on them, your most sensitive data, as Ernie says and this panel has said, that's processing customer data, patient data, right? Pharmacies that are filling prescriptions for the most vulnerable patients across this country. And so it's really understanding your assets, the business criticality, the data, right, your crown jewels, and protecting those first, prioritizing, implementing those controls first.
Great, thank you all. Michael, Ernie touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious to hear from your perspective, what is the cost of failing the CMMC assessment? And not just necessarily like the reassessment fees, but when it comes to the contract risk, timeline impact, and competitive disadvantage.
Yeah, so in the CMMC world, and again, you know, pick your industry that you're in, right? There's got to be some security requirement that you're going to have to meet. But specifically for the CMMC, what it's turning out to be is it's a business eligibility marker, right? So you're going to be out of a market. You're not going to be able to even participate in the market if you don't have it, what you need. And so what's the impact of that? You know, we talk to small to medium-sized businesses. They do 100% of their revenue comes from defense contracts. And so for them, it's going to go to zero. We talk to others that do 15 to 20% of their revenue. And so it really just depends. But again, it's kind of table stakes at this stage of the game that you've got to have it or you're going to find yourself, you know, out of opportunities and missed opportunities. Certainly there are fines. You know, pay the parking ticket, I think is like, it's cheaper to pay the parking ticket. I don't care. Just pull up front. You know, we've got $5 billion in the bank. Who cares? You know, you're not even going to be allowed to drive anymore, you know, if you don't have it.
So for the small defense contractors that are in this room with us today, what is the single thing that they can do in the next 30 days that would most meaningfully improve their readiness?
I would say be aware of their requirements and get help. Get help from folks that know what's going on, especially in the CMMC. I spent 20 years in the DoD running information systems. I'm shocked at how much nuance has been built into the CMMC model. It took me probably 6 months to learn it all. So it's unnecessarily complicated. So you just have to work with people and just make sure you understand it. And then the other thing I would say is plan and program for it. We still talk to companies that are facing this hurdle. We need to bid on this contract. GlobalSoft came out. We don't have a level 2. What do we do? And they still don't have funding. They haven't gone internally to secure the funding that's needed to either upgrade the tool set, hire a consultant, pay for a third-party assessment. And so it's like, go into the boardroom right now and make the business case that you need this, or have them tell you that you don't, but put this in front of them, put this budget estimate in front of them, and at least secure the funding to move forward.
Absolutely. So next we're going to shift into a topic that is probably on a lot of people's minds in this room, artificial intelligence. AI has transformed the threat landscape in both directions simultaneously. Attackers are using it to generate convincing attacks and identify vulnerabilities faster than human analysts can. And then on the defender side, they're using it to detect anomalies, accelerate incident response, and build adaptive security architectures. And the organizations that are caught in the middle without either capability are usually the ones that are the most vulnerable. Joyce, my first question is for you. You recently wrote about AI agents and identity access management. When an AI system is making decisions autonomously, accessing systems, running processes, taking actions, what is the security architecture problem that nobody has solved yet?
So with an AI agent, we have to treat AI agents like they're a part of your team. The same way you would treat an employee, right? You give an employee access to your organization. You have to do that with your AI model, right? Make sure you have strong authentication, right? I prefer short-lived certificates so we can prepare for quantum computing as well. But treat it, make sure that you're configuring that AI agent to specifically what they can and cannot do, right? But also ensuring that because the attack surface is now broader, we must also implement comprehensive monitoring to ensure that you're monitoring that agent to make sure that it's doing what you configured it to do. Now, how I have been advising companies that I've been working with and at CVS was to enable monitoring agents, and so that you are configuring that agent with all of your policies, your acceptable use policy, your ethical policies, your security policies, but also what that agent can and can't do. And so it's an observer agent, is monitoring to make sure that that agentic agent is not performing any tasks that is not programmed and approved to do, right? And if it does see that it's doing something that it's not supposed to do, pull that cert, pull that certificate, right? So that that agent becomes disabled immediately, right? And that's what we must do. We must enable observer agents, we must monitor those agentic agents, and we must action if it's doing something that it's not supposed to do, right? Because there's lots of security risk with AI agents, especially agentic, right? Because you can have prompt injections, hallucinations, there's just so many risks. And even sensitive data, the users and your own employees can be adding sensitive data or sensitive information, and because it is an LLM, it's learning, right? It's continuously learning. Yeah, and so there's lots of information that you have to protect, but I'm a big proponent of observer AI agents across your network, near your domain controllers, near your applications, near your network devices, on your perimeter. Get them out there so they can continuously monitor those agentic AI agents.
Oh my goodness, that is fascinating. Very interesting. Larry, going back into the healthcare technology side of things, for a growth stage company with no CISO and limited security budget, AI-driven attacks are an existential threat. What is the minimum viable security architecture for a company that genuinely cannot afford to build more?
I like this question because I always tussle with it. Everybody is, I feel like to some extent it's a little bit overhyped with AI attacks, because I always argue that it was just as bad or worse before AI, right? We didn't figure it out before AI. Why are we, getting so caught up because of AI now? Now, it does, of course, matter. If you're a growth stage company, it's going to be different than an enterprise. An enterprise company probably will be more successful and experience more AI attacks. So really, I think they need to go back to the basics, stick to the basics, foundation, and especially if you're in the growth stages. At that point, you really want to bring a security expert on your team and not just give the security function to your developers or engineers. Kind of like, let's start there. But some foundational controls are like access controls, right? So this is one of the problems and what usually happens when you're bootstrapping. It's 2 or 3 people and everybody has admin rights. It kind of, we don't like to hear that, cyber professionals, but it kind of get it, right? You're bootstrapping. But the problem is they take that habit as they get to the growth stages. They're like 40 people now, and 40 people have, admin rights, if you will. So they really need to learn to scale that back and limit the amount of privileges so individuals have enough privileges to do their job functions, right? So something else you need to have are policies. Everybody hates them, they're boring, but you have to establish the foundation and set the management expectations across the organization, and you do that with your policies. If you don't have them, everybody's kind of operating in their heads and everything is ad hoc, and that definitely doesn't help things. So you need to make sure you lay that foundation out. Encryption, another basic control, endpoints, your infrastructure. But something else Joyce mentioned that I want to talk about is asset management. Making sure you understand what you have within your infrastructure, because you can't protect what you don't know you have. And especially in the age of AI, we love our developers, but if it makes the job more efficient, and AI is definitely doing that, then, they're more likely to use the tools. So we need to have some type of understanding of what tools are being used in the environment so we can protect them. And the last thing I would say is security awareness training. Why? Because the majority of breaches, regardless if it is healthcare or not, we hear about it's ransomware, and that's an educational issue. And the problem that we have there across the industry is that we're sending out security awareness training and kind of leaving it there. We're not going back to analyze to say, hey, okay, who failed? Who did good? And if somebody did fail, are we going to retrain them? What type of steps are we going to take there? And we kind of talked about this earlier. This is not my idea, but I thought it was genius when I heard it. When I involve your marketing team, you know, because they're the communicators, and we really want to make sure that our users are digesting the information. We want to understand what they do and don't like about it, and we can fix that. And I believe marketing can help you get across that hurdle to make sure that the training is actually educating the workforce, and we can stop things like phishing.
On that awareness training, the one thing, if for those in the room, if you have influence with this, if you're talking about like phishing awareness, and you're talking about, please, 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 please include in that training what to do if you experience it. Because, I mean, Microsoft Outlook, actually, they have a report phishing, report junk little tab, right? But in typical, you know, form, with a lot of the things, if you don't know what that is, you don't know what it is, you don't know it's there and all that. That, to me, was one of the, that's like the greatest thing in the world now is that you can do this. And so if you see something, and it doesn't matter if you get it wrong, it doesn't matter if it's, you know, if you see something like, this is weird, you can just do that. And that helps the security team. But what most security trainings that I have all seen is like, phishing is bad. It's going to happen to you. You won't be able to recognize it. This it is. This is what it looks like. And then it just ends. And you're like, okay, that's great. So what do I do? Well, is it the answer, submit a help ticket? No, I mean, that's a little, so it's, no, just, if that's the case, tell people what to do. Because you don't just want to inform people, hey, it's a dangerous world out there, watch out for yourself. It's like, no, you're part of the organization, you're part of the team. And when you report it, that's you're contributing to the security posture of the entity. So that's because I've seen so many, it's like, oh yeah, make sure you report it. How? In accordance with DoD instruction F-118.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned that. You're absolutely right, because I've seen it where someone will experience a phishing email and pass it around, trying to figure out where it goes to, like who to send it to. So, yeah, it's absolutely. I've seen it.
Reply to all on that?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
That's a classic.
Yeah, report the phishing emails.
DDoS yourself.
So my last question, I think, for today is kind of an open question for everyone on the panel here, and I'd like to end on a little bit of a positive note. Where are you seeing AI actually create opportunities on the defense side?
You know, I'll take that one. You know, it's doing a lot in terms of analysis. It's doing a lot in terms of automation. It can certainly help. I mean, if you look around the room, I mean, it's you know, I guess I'm fortunate, maybe not fortunate. You know, when I started out my IT career, there was no real wide area network. We just had local area networks, and then we had wide area networks, and then we had data centers, and then we had cloud, and then we had third-party apps, and now we have AI, and you know, in the next couple of years, we're going to have the next big thing. And so, for me, I think it's just, again, focusing on the basics and then understanding how can this particular technology help me do better at the basics of what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah. I think it's also helping with risk correlation, right? With AI, there's so much risk data from your security tools, from your IT tools. It's helping to correlate that data, correlate that telemetry so that you understand the true risks that are in your environment, right? So you're not chasing ghosts, you're focused on risk prioritization, and you're focused on those true risks that are in your environment. So I believe AI is also helping with that, because there's so much telemetry, it needs to be condensed and consolidated so that you can know where to take action.
My thing is, I'll tell you what it's doing and what it can do is it can make everybody a superhero. I'm telling you, I'm not joking. Is that now all of a sudden every person can create their own army to go take on any challenge that they have. That's the part I think is going to be. That's the revolutionary part. Is now it's like, hey, if you got an idea, you can put it into action, and that's going to enable people to do such incredible things at incredible scale and speed, and that's the part that's going to be good.
Yeah, I would say it's helping in so many different aspects of security operations. Security awareness training, can become more adaptable in terms of security orchestration. Yeah, it helps there as well too, to adapt and detect threats. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for joining us for this panel today. Grateful to you all for being here. Thank you. So great being with you all.